Adam, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Trump has made ending the war a priority, but no real progress is being made. Is the administration's work on this helping or hurting, and what would actually need to happen for this to be helpful from the Trump administration?
The Trump administration's engagement with peace negotiations with Russia has been remarkably ineffective. Since the beginning of the year, you've had European nations demanding an immediate ceasefire, followed by more complicated peace negotiations. But Russia does not want that, and Russia has consistently said that it wants to only have a ceasefire at the end of peace talks, presumably so that it can have its military push its advantages during the peace negotiation process and essentially erode Kyiv's negotiating position. Now, whenever European powers have said that they're going to sanction Russia, and whenever they've said that they're going to establish a deadline, Trump has come in and said, no, 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 we're going to enter another round of peace talks, which have always failed, and we're going to give another extension for sanctions. And so this process has repeated multiple times. Sanctions have been delayed and delayed and delayed. And as a result, Russia's economy is still not sanctioned, and there have been no real consequences. Now, in order for these peace negotiations to actually move forward, you would have to apply more potent economic pressure on Russia, which would mean actually applying sanctions, which Trump does not seem willing to do. And then on your Russian side, you would need Russia to accept a more realistic peace proposal, because right now Russia's idea of peace is essentially asking Ukraine to give up between 1 to 4 of its partially occupied provinces, and in the process to give up almost all of its most important defensive fortifications, which would leave Ukraine incredibly vulnerable to further invasion. And Ukraine is obviously saying no to that. They're also saying no to the demand that they demilitarize, and Russia is not budging here. And so we have no path forward. Basically, Russia wants Ukraine to capitulate, and Ukraine is saying no. The United States is pretending like it doesn't understand what's happening here and is pushing for peace negotiations that are doomed and not imposing sanctions while all of this quagmire continues.
Now, in a Truth Social post, Donald Trump did insinuate that under Biden, it was unfair that Ukraine could not strike targets within Russia. Could this signal a shift in the administration's approach, especially when it comes to supporting Ukraine?
I mean, we have yet to see what that means, because it turns out that the United States has actually quietly prohibited Ukraine from using long-range weapons or long-range American weapons in Russia. And that also extends to European weapons that use American intelligence or American components. So although Trump is saying that it is unfair that Ukraine can't strike deep into Russia, he's also enabling that. Now, the Ukrainians have worked around this by developing their own long-range weapons. Most recently, they unveiled the Flamingo ballistic missile, which has an incredible range and can basically hit all of European Russia, including Russia's main oil refinery infrastructure and potentially Moscow. So we'll see what happens there.
Now, on Sunday, Mark Carney said that there's a chance that Canada could send troops to Ukraine and potentially have boots on the ground presence. Here's what he had to say.
We are working through with our allies and Coalition of the Willing and with Ukraine the modalities of those security guarantees on the land, in the air, and the sea. And I would not exclude the presence of troops.
What impact would this have on getting closer to a ceasefire, as Russia has repeatedly said that it doesn't want NATO forces in Ukraine?
I mean, I don't think it'll get us any closer to a peace deal, because in order for us to have a peace deal, you need to have some middle ground between the two different parties that are negotiating. So that would be Ukraine and Russia. And as I mentioned earlier, Russia has showed no indication that it is willing to compromise on its war goals, unless it's finally forced to do so because of economic pressure. However, what this does seem to do is that it seems to show a certain degree of solidarity with Ukraine, and hopefully that can create more pressure for the United States to take its position more seriously and to eventually apply sanctions.
Now, Carney also mentioned Canadian security guarantees. What beyond troops on the ground would those security guarantees include, or what would that look like?
I mean, for the most part, it would just be troops on the ground. And so Carney emphasized that ultimately the Ukrainian military is the spine of Ukrainian defense. There's no way around that. I mean, that's just, common sense for anyone. But Ottawa doesn't believe that it's realistic for the Ukrainian military to deter further Russian aggression by itself, and that it will be necessary for military forces from the coalition of the willing. So these are these Western allies like Germany, like France, like the United Kingdom, like Canada, potentially Japan, to send their own troops as well. Essentially to tell Russia that if you do try to invade Ukraine again, that this will, turn into a much larger conflict with all of these other states. Now, I mean, if you can take an expanded definition of what counts as security guarantees, you do have Canada sending more weapons to Ukraine. So Carney just announced $2 billion in further military assistance, but the volume of that assistance from Canada is actually relatively low when you contextualize the numbers.
And do you think it was wise for Canada to involve itself in this conflict the way that it has following Mark Carney's announcement?
Absolutely. So Canada has not had a significant threat to its security for decades, and as a result, we become complacent and weak, and we basically just mooch off the United States for our security. But that's changing right now. The world in general is becoming a more dangerous place, and for Canada specifically, we have to worry about our Arctic sovereignty because global warming is opening up new shipping channels in the Arctic, and so the Arctic is becoming a contested economic and military space. Now, since 2022, Russia has accelerated its militarization of its northern shores, and it's been joined by China, which wants to basically position itself as a near polar power as well. So Moscow and Beijing essentially want to collaboratively monopolize the North, and that comes at Canada's expense. We as Canadians, we take it for granted that our northern territories, that that the Yukon or that none of that will always be under control, but really we have a very tenuous grasp over that land. There's no people there. There's 100,000, 120,000 Canadians living up there. So it would be very easy for Russia and China to send over warships to essentially take over control of these shipping channels in a generation or two. And so when you look at this as a large puzzle, it obviously makes sense for us to support Ukraine and Eastern Europe and to undermine Russian power there, so that way we can weaken and undermine Russia and slow down its attempts to militarize and control the Arctic. Because, we don't have a lot of time here. And Canada, a single icebreaker costs $3-4 billion to build and at least a decade to construct. So doing this buys us the time that we need that we don't currently have.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for breaking that down for us.
Thanks for having me.